Douglas Whitaker, an 82-year-old retired librarian with a wit sharper than Arctic winds, had only one request on his deathbed: to visit the Arctic Circle. His family thought it was the dementia talking, but Douglas insisted. Armed with a parka, a thermos of tea, and his late wife's lucky compass, he boarded a rickety icebreaker. What started as a quirky bucket list trip turned into the adventure of a lifetime when he stumbled upon an ancient frozen artifact that could rewrite history itself. Douglas Whitaker, an 82-year-old retired librarian, was a peculiar man with peculiar wishes. While most people his age wanted to lounge in Florida or play bingo in air-conditioned halls, Douglas dreamed of venturing to the Arctic Circle. The reason? "Because I've never been," he told his family with a wry smile, sipping his Earl Grey tea. His children, Philip and Margaret, exchanged worried glances. "Dad," Philip began, "you've never been to prison either, but you don't see us sending you there." But Douglas was unrelenting. For months, he filled their inboxes with emails titled "Arctic Circle or Bust," accompanied by photos of polar bears, icebergs, and badly photoshopped pictures of himself in a parka. He even signed up for social media and started a campaign: "Get Douglas to the Arctic." Much to everyone's surprise, the hashtag caught on. Strangers donated funds, and within weeks, Douglas had enough money to join an expedition. The day of departure was chaos incarnate. Douglas, wearing a parka 3 sizes too big, arrived at the dock with a suitcase filled with tea bags, woolen socks, and a flask of brandy. The scientists he'd be joining, serious, no-nonsense types, looked at him like he'd wandered into the wrong movie. "You must be Dr. Whitaker," one of them said, trying to hide their skepticism. "Doctor of Dewey Decimal," Douglas replied, shaking their hand with gusto. Their ship, the Borealis, was a sturdy icebreaker that creaked ominously as they set sail. Douglas immediately took to wandering its decks, offering unsolicited advice. "You know, if we painted this ship red, we'd attract fewer narwhals," he told an unsuspecting crew member, who stared at him in silence before walking away. The real fun began on the second day, when Douglas discovered the ship's library. It was a modest collection, mostly field guides and technical manuals, but Douglas treated it like a treasure trove. He spent hours poring over books about Arctic flora and fauna, occasionally bursting into the dining hall to share random facts. "Did you know polar bear fur isn't white? It's translucent, like me when I forget my sunscreen." By the third day, Douglas had earned the nickname Captain Chaos. It started when he mistook a pair of snowshoes for paddles and tried to demonstrate their versatility by rowing an imaginary boat across the deck. Later, he tried to organize a penguin parade, only to be reminded, again, that penguins lived in the Antarctic, not the Arctic. Despite the mishaps, Douglas's charm was undeniable. He befriended a young glaciologist named Elena, who found his endless curiosity refreshing. One evening, as they stood on deck watching the northern lights, Douglas confided, "You know, my wife always wanted to see the aurora borealis. She used to say it was the closest thing to magic this world had. I guess this trip is for both of us." Elena smiled. "She must have been an amazing woman." "She was," Douglas replied, his voice soft, "and she always believed in adventure, said life was too short to play it safe." The conversation deepened their bond, and soon Elena became Douglas's unofficial guide, answering his questions and indulging his wild theories. When Douglas proposed that icebergs were secretly alien spaceships, Elena didn't laugh. Instead, she asked, "What kind of aliens do you think they'd be?" "Cold ones," Douglas said, grinning. "Very cold ones." The expedition progressed, and while Douglas wasn't much help scientifically, he became the heart of the group. He rallied spirits during storms, cracked jokes when equipment failed, and even taught the crew how to make the perfect cup of tea in sub-zero temperatures. "The trick," he explained, "is to warm the cup first. It's all about respect for the tea and the drinker." But beneath the humor and eccentricity, Douglas harbored a quiet determination. This wasn't just a bucket list trip, it was a farewell tour. He knew his time was limited, and he wanted to spend it doing something extraordinary. And so, each day he embraced the Arctic's harsh beauty, the biting winds, the endless snow, the haunting silence, with a reverence that left even the most jaded scientists in awe. One evening, as the ship approached an uncharted region, Douglas's late wife's compass, an antique he carried everywhere, began to behave strangely. The needle, usually steady, spun erratically. Intrigued, Douglas showed it to Elena. "Do you think it's broken?" he asked. Elena frowned. "It's an old compass, but it shouldn't do that. Maybe there's a magnetic anomaly nearby." Douglas's eyes twinkled. "Or maybe it's pointing us to buried treasure." The next morning, the captain announced that they'd be stopping to investigate a nearby ice formation that had appeared on satellite images. As the team prepared to disembark, Douglas couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary was about to happen. Clutching the compass, he muttered, "Lead the way, Mary Ann. Let's see where this adventure takes us." The compass spun wildly in Douglas's hand as if possessed by a mischievous spirit. The rest of the team followed reluctantly, muttering about old men and their fairy tales. But Douglas was undeterred. He marched through the icy terrain with the energy of a man half his age, or at least one who didn't realize he'd feel all this walking in his knees later. Elena, carrying the equipment, caught up to him and asked, "What's the plan, if this thing leads us straight into a snowbank?" "Then we'll build the finest snowbank fort you've ever seen," Douglas quipped, grinning. As they trudged through the snow, the wind howled like an irate banshee. The team's sled dogs barked nervously, their instincts picking up something unseen. "This better be worth it," grumbled Connor, the team's geophysicist. He was a skeptic to the core, a man who believed in data, not destiny. Douglas responded with a chipper, "It always is," which only made Connor grumble louder. An hour into the journey, the compass needle steadied, pointing resolutely toward a jagged hill in the distance. "There," Douglas declared, raising the compass like it was Excalibur. The hill seemed ordinary, just a mass of ice and snow, but the compass disagreed. The team set up camp at the base, unwilling to explore further in the failing light. That night, as the crew huddled in their tents, the Arctic put on a dazzling display. The northern lights painted the sky in waves of green and purple, but Douglas barely noticed. His attention was fixed on the compass, which glowed faintly, as if reacting to something nearby. "You're full of surprises," he whispered, turning it over in his hands. The next morning, the team began digging. At first it was tedious work, just layers of snow and ice, but after hours of effort, Elena struck something solid. "I've got something," she shouted, her voice tinged with excitement. The team gathered around as she cleared the ice, revealing a metallic surface etched with intricate patterns. It was unlike anything they'd ever seen, both alien and ancient. "What is it?" Connor asked, his skepticism giving way to curiosity. "Looks like a hatch," Elena replied, brushing away more snow. Douglas knelt beside it, his breath visible in the freezing air. The compass was practically vibrating in his hand now. "Well," he said, "only one way to find out." Before anyone could stop him, he pressed his hand against the surface. The hatch emitted a low hum, and the patterns began to glow, bathing the team in an otherworldly light. Connor shouted, "Douglas, what did you do?" But his voice was drowned out by the sound of ice cracking. The ground beneath them gave way, and they plummeted into darkness. When Douglas came to, he was lying on a smooth, glowing floor. The air was warmer than it had any right to be in the Arctic, and the light emanated from strange crystals embedded in the walls. Around him, the team groaned as they regained consciousness. "Where are we?" Elena asked, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. Douglas helped her to her feet. "If I had to guess," he said, "I'd say we're inside whatever that hatch was guarding." The chamber was enormous, its walls adorned with murals that seemed to tell a story. The images depicted tall, humanoid figures with elongated limbs and crystalline skin. They were shown creating vast cities, harnessing the power of the stars, and finally fleeing from a great cataclysm. Elena studied the murals, her scientist's mind racing. This could rewrite everything we know about human history. Connor, still shaken, muttered, "If we live long enough to tell anyone?" At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal holding a strange object. It resembled a sphere encased in a lattice of glowing threads, and it pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. Douglas approached it, the compass in his hand glowing brighter with every step. "Careful," Elena warned, but Douglas was already reaching out. The moment his fingers brushed the sphere, a surge of energy coursed through the room. The murals lit up, and a deep, resonant voice filled the air. "Key-bearer," it intoned, "you have come at last." The team froze. Did that thing just talk?" Connor stammered. Douglas, ever unflappable, replied, "Yes, and it has excellent enunciation." The voice continued, "You have awakened the heart of the ancients. Your world stands on the brink, as ours once did. Will you learn from our mistakes, or repeat them?" Douglas, now fully channeling his inner adventurer, asked, "What mistakes? What brink? You're going to have to be a bit more specific, mate." The sphere pulsed again, projecting images into the air. They showed a thriving civilization brought to its knees by greed, arrogance, and environmental collapse. "We sought to conquer the forces of nature," the voice explained, "but in doing so, we doomed ourselves. This relic holds the knowledge you will need to avoid our fate." Elena stepped forward, her skepticism melting away. "Why Douglas? Why choose him?" The voice replied, "The key-bearer is chosen not by us, but by the compass of fate. His journey is one of destiny." Connor muttered, "Destiny, my foot. He's just a lucky old man with a tea obsession." Douglas turned to face his team, a rare seriousness in his eyes. "Luck or not, we're here for a reason. Let's make it count." The voice spoke again, softer this time. "The knowledge within the heart is vast, but it must be earned. Will you accept the trials?" Douglas looked at his team, then back at the sphere. With a determined nod, he said, "Bring it on." The chamber rumbled as the sphere's light intensified, bathing the team in a warm, golden glow. Before they could prepare themselves, the floor beneath them shifted, transforming into a maze of pathways illuminated by pulsating crystal veins. The sphere's voice resonated again, calm but commanding. "The trials will test your unity, your courage, and your resolve. Succeed, and the knowledge of the ancients will be yours. Fail, and you will remain here, forgotten." "Lovely pep talk," Douglas muttered, tucking the compass into his pocket. "So, what's first? Do we wrestle polar bears or solve riddles?" As if on cue, a doorway appeared ahead, its edges glowing faintly. The team exchanged nervous glances. "Guess we're going through there," Elena said, adjusting her headlamp. Douglas, ever the optimist, led the way, whistling an off-key tune that did nothing to reassure the others. The first trial revealed itself as they entered a cavern filled with reflective surfaces. Mirrors of varying sizes covered the walls, floor, and ceiling, each distorting their reflections into strange and unsettling forms. The sphere's voice echoed, "This is the trial of unity. Only those who move as one shall find the path forward." "Unity, huh?" Connor said, rubbing his temples. "We can't even agree on what to eat for lunch." Douglas clapped him on the back. "Well, my boy, it's time to get in sync. Let's start with the conga line." Connor groaned, but Elena smiled. "Actually, he might be onto something. If we move together in a pattern, maybe we can figure this out." With some grumbling, the team linked arms and began to step cautiously across the mirrored floor. At first, their movements were clumsy, and the mirrors flickered ominously, projecting images of failure, crumbling cities, desolate landscapes, and their own faces frozen in terror. "Focus!" Elena urged, her voice cutting through the rising tension. Gradually, they found a rhythm, stepping in unison and avoiding the cracks between mirrors. The images shifted, now showing moments of triumph, scientific discoveries, acts of kindness, and breathtaking views of the northern lights. As they reached the end of the room, a doorway materialized, and the mirrors shimmered one final time before going dark. "One trial down," Douglas said cheerfully, though his knees were protesting loudly. "Piece of cake." The next chamber was even more daunting. A chasm stretched before them, impossibly wide, with a narrow, crumbling bridge spanning its length. The sphere's voice returned. "The trial of courage. The path is perilous, but trust in your instincts, and you shall prevail." Connor looked over the edge and blanched. "I don't think my instincts are going to help me not fall to my death." Elena examined the bridge. "It's unstable, but if we go one at a time and distribute our weight carefully, we might make it." Douglas stepped forward, surprising everyone. "I'll go first," he announced, gripping the compass tightly. "If an old man can cross this, so can all of you." He took a deep breath and stepped onto the bridge, which creaked alarmingly under his weight. Each step felt like a lifetime, but he kept his eyes forward, muttering encouragement to himself. "One step at a time, old chap. You've faced worse. Remember the time Margaret made tofu casserole?" The others watched anxiously as he reached the halfway point. "You're doing great, Douglas," Elena called, though her voice trembled. When Douglas finally reached the other side, he turned and waved triumphantly. "Your turn." One by one, the others followed, each facing their own moments of doubt. Connor nearly lost his footing, but Douglas's steady encouragement helped him regain his balance. When they all reached the other side, they collapsed in relief. "Remind me to never complain about stairs again," Connor said, wiping sweat from his brow. The final trial awaited them in a circular chamber filled with flowing water that defied gravity, spiraling upward like liquid ribbons. At its center was a pedestal with an empty basin. The sphere's voice intoned, "The trial of resolve. Fill the basin, and the heart shall be yours." Elena examined the scene, her scientific mind racing. "The water's flowing upward, so we need to figure out how to redirect it into the basin." They began experimenting with the crystals embedded in the walls, which seemed to control the water's flow. It was a tedious process, requiring precision and patience. As hours passed, tempers flared. "This is impossible," Connor snapped, throwing his gloves to the ground. "Nothing's impossible," Douglas said firmly, placing a hand on Connor's shoulder. "We've come this far, haven't we? Let's finish what we started." His words reignited their determination, and together they devised a solution. By aligning the crystals in a specific pattern, they managed to redirect the water into the basin. As the basin filled, the chamber glowed, and the water spiraled upward in a dazzling display before vanishing. The pedestal sank into the floor, revealing the sphere once more. Its voice was softer now, almost reverent. "You have proven yourselves worthy. The knowledge of the ancients is now yours. Use it wisely, and may your world avoid the fate that befell ours." Douglas approached the sphere, his hands trembling slightly. "What happens now?" he asked. "The heart shall guide you," the voice replied, "but your journey is far from over." Before anyone could ask what that meant, the chamber began to dissolve, the walls fading into light. When they opened their eyes, they were back on the surface, the Arctic wind biting at their faces. The sphere rested in Douglas's hands, its glow faint but steady. "Well," Douglas said, breaking the silence, "that was a bit more exciting than bingo night." The team laughed, their camaraderie stronger than ever. Whatever lay ahead, they knew they could face it together. The wind howled mercilessly as Douglas and the team stood at the edge of their discovery. The sphere, still glowing faintly in his hands, felt heavier than it should. Elena was the first to break the silence. "What do we do with it now?" she asked, her voice tinged with awe and uncertainty. Douglas, ever the pragmatist, shrugged. Well, I doubt it's going to fit in my luggage. Maybe we should read the manual first. Connor, still recovering from the trials, shot him a glare. You think this thing comes with instructions? It's an alien artifact, Douglas. Exactly, Douglas replied. And aliens probably had excellent customer service. We just need to figure out how to ask. The sphere pulsed faintly, as if responding to his words. Lines of light began to crawl across its surface, forming intricate patterns that shifted and flowed like living ink. Elena leaned in, her breath visible in the frigid air. It's reacting to you, Douglas. Try speaking to it again. Douglas cleared his throat, feeling a bit foolish. Hello there, mysterious ancient artifact. Mind telling us what you're all about? To everyone's surprise, the sphere responded. A soft hum filled the air, and a voice, calm, melodic, and strangely familiar, spoke. The heart of the ancients contains the legacy of a civilization long lost. Its knowledge is both a gift and a warning. The choice of what to do with it lies with you. The team exchanged glances. A warning? Elena asked. About what? The sphere began to project images into the air, much like a hologram. They saw towering cities made of crystal and light, teeming with life. The ancients were a marvel of engineering and harmony, their technology blending seamlessly with nature. But the images darkened, showing conflict, greed, and environmental collapse. The cities crumbled, their beauty reduced to ruin. Our hubris was our downfall, the voice continued. We sought to dominate nature rather than coexist with it. The heart was created to preserve our knowledge and serve as a guide for those who came after us. Heed its lessons or suffer the same fate. Douglas scratched his head. Well, that's cheery. So, what's the plan? Do we turn it into a museum exhibit, or does it come with instructions for saving the world? The voice ignored his sarcasm. The heart contains advanced knowledge, energy, medicine, and the means to restore balance to your world. But it is not a simple gift. It must be earned through wisdom and unity. Divided, you will fail. Elena's eyes sparkled with the possibilities. This could change everything. Solve climate change, cure diseases, revolutionize how we live. Connor, ever the skeptic, crossed his arms. Or it could get us killed. Imagine what would happen if the wrong people got their hands on this. Douglas, holding the sphere tightly, nodded. Connor's right. This isn't just about discovery, it's about responsibility. If we're not careful, this could do more harm than good. The conversation was cut short by a sudden gust of wind. The ice beneath their feet groaned ominously, and cracks began to spiderweb outward. We need to move, Elena shouted, grabbing her equipment. The team scrambled back to their sleds, the sphere tucked safely under Douglas's arm. As they raced across the icy expanse, the ground behind them gave way, revealing a chasm that swallowed their former campsite. The Arctic was reminding them of its power, a harsh and unforgiving guardian of its secrets. By the time they reached the safety of the ship, exhaustion had set in. Douglas slumped into a chair, cradling the sphere like a child. Well, that was invigorating, he said, his voice heavy with sarcasm. Elena sat across from him, her mind racing. We can't keep this a secret, Douglas. The world needs to know. Connor shook his head. And what happens when governments and corporations get involved? They'll weaponize it, exploit it. You saw what happened to the ancients. Do you really think we're any better? The room fell silent. Douglas stared at the sphere, its soft glow reflecting in his tired eyes. Maybe, he said finally, we need to think smaller. Start with one step instead of trying to save the whole world at once. Elena frowned. What do you mean? Douglas leaned back, the weight of the artifact pressing on his lap. We don't need to shout it from the rooftops. We find the right people, the ones who care more about doing good than making a profit. We share the knowledge carefully, piece by piece. The Borealis began its journey back to civilization. carrying not just the sphere but the weight of its implications. As they approached the nearest port, Douglas stood on the deck, the cold wind biting at his face. He held the compass in one hand and the sphere in the other, feeling the weight of both. "Mary Ann," he whispered to the wind, "I hope you're watching. This is turning out to be one hell of an adventure." The Borealis docked at the icy port under the shroud of night, its crew weary but alert. News of the expedition had somehow leaked, and a crowd of reporters, scientists, and government officials waited at the pier like vultures circling a carcass. The flash of cameras and the clamor of voices broke the Arctic silence as soon as Douglas stepped off the ship, the sphere safely tucked in a reinforced case. "Mr. Whitaker, is it true you've discovered alien technology?" "Dr. Elena, can you confirm if it's dangerous?" "Connor, what are the implications for humanity?" The questions came rapid fire, but Douglas raised a hand, silencing the crowd with unexpected authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm flattered by the attention, but I think we can all agree this isn't the time or place for a Q&A. Let's not lose our heads over what may or may not be a fancy paperweight." The crowd murmured, unsure whether to laugh or press for more answers. Elena stepped forward, her demeanor calm but firm. "We've made an extraordinary discovery, but it requires further study. Please respect the sensitivity of the situation." With that, the team pushed through the throng and climbed into a waiting vehicle arranged by the university funding their expedition. As the car sped through snow-dusted streets, the atmosphere inside was tense. "Well, that was fun," Connor muttered, staring out the window. "How long do you think we have before someone tries to take this thing from us?" Douglas tapped the case containing the sphere. "As long as we don't hand it over on a silver platter, I'd say we've got some time. Besides, who would dare steal from an old man with a sharp tongue?" Elena wasn't laughing. "Douglas, this isn't a joke. We've stumbled onto something that could change the world, or destroy it. The wrong people will stop at nothing to get their hands on it." The weight of her words settled over the group. Douglas sighed, his usual humor dimmed. "So, what's the plan then? Hide it in my attic? Bury it in the backyard next to my garden gnome?" "No," Elena said firmly. "We need to control the narrative. If we're transparent about what we've found and involve the right people, we can guide how it's used." Connor snorted. "You're putting a lot of faith in humanity, Elena. Have you met people? They'll want to weaponize it, monetize it, or both." Douglas leaned back, rubbing his temples. "You're both right, in your own way. But here's the thing. If we do nothing, if we let fear dictate our actions, then we've already failed. We have to try, even if it's a long shot." Their discussion was interrupted when the car pulled up to a private research facility nestled on the edge of town. The team was escorted inside, the case containing the sphere under constant watch. A secure lab had been prepared for their arrival, equipped with state-of-the-art equipment and a level of security that rivaled a top-secret military base. Inside the lab, Elena wasted no time. She connected the sphere to a custom-built interface designed to analyze its energy signatures. As the device powered up, the sphere responded immediately, its glowing threads spreading across the surface like veins carrying liquid light. The room was bathed in an ethereal glow, and the hum of power filled the air. "What do you think it's doing?" Connor asked, his voice tinged with both awe and suspicion. "It's communicating," Elena replied, her eyes fixed on the readings. "The patterns in the light, it's a language, or at least a code. If we can decode it, we might be able to access its knowledge." Douglas, who had been silent for a while, stepped closer. "And what if it doesn't want to share? What if it's testing us like before?" Elena hesitated. "Then we prove ourselves worthy, just like we did in the trials." Hours turned into days as the team worked tirelessly. The sphere seemed to respond to their efforts, its glow intensifying whenever they made progress. At one point, Douglas joked, "It's like training a very shiny, very ancient dog." But behind the humor was an undeniable tension. The knowledge they sought could change the course of history, or unleash consequences they couldn't predict. Finally, on the 5th day, they made a breakthrough. Elena deciphered a key sequence in the sphere's patterns, and the device emitted a pulse of light that filled the room. The holographic projections returned, but this time they were different, clearer, more focused. The ancients appeared again, their crystalline forms vibrant and alive. One figure stepped forward, addressing the team directly. "You have proven your resolve and unity. The heart of the ancients is now yours to wield. But be warned, its power is both a blessing and a curse. Use it wisely." Connor crossed his arms. "Does every ancient civilization specialize in cryptic warnings? Just once, I'd like a straight answer." The figure tilted its head, almost as if amused. "The answers you seek lie not in the heart itself, but in how you choose to use it. Your world stands on the brink, as ours once did. The choice is yours." The projections faded, leaving the team in stunned silence. Douglas finally broke it with a dry chuckle. "Well, no pressure then." The days that followed were a whirlwind. Elena published an initial, heavily redacted report to the scientific community, carefully omitting the artifact's more sensitive capabilities. Governments reached out, offering funding, protection, and, inevitably, subtle threats. The team held their ground, insisting on transparency and collaboration. Douglas, however, felt the weight of the artifact more keenly than the others. Late one night he sat alone in the lab, the sphere resting in front of him. He traced its glowing patterns with a finger, his thoughts a jumble of excitement, fear, and responsibility. "Mary Ann," he whispered, "I wish you were here. You'd know what to do." The sphere pulsed faintly, almost as if in response. Douglas chuckled. "Don't worry, old girl, I'm not giving up yet." The weight of the sphere, both literal and metaphorical, had settled deeply on Douglas by the time the team finalized their plans. The heart of the ancients had revealed enough to offer hope, but also enough to instill fear. The world outside their secure facility clamored for answers, its curiosity growing into suspicion. Reporters speculated, governments pressured, and shadowy organizations began to hover at the edges like wolves around an unguarded fire. Douglas stood on the rooftop of the facility one crisp morning, the cold air biting his face. The compass his wife had left him dangled from his hand, its needle pointing steadily north. "Mary Ann," he murmured, "you always said I'd find my way. Funny, though, I wasn't expecting it to involve glowing artifacts and cryptic warnings." The sound of footsteps behind him broke his reverie. It was Elena, bundled in a thick coat, her expression serious. "Douglas," she said, "we've made contact with the UN. They're sending representatives to review the artifact. We think it's the best way to keep things transparent." Douglas snorted. "The UN, huh? A bunch of politicians sitting around a table arguing about who gets the biggest piece of the pie. You really think they're the answer?" Elena frowned. "What other choice do we have? If we keep it hidden, we'll be no better than the people we're trying to protect it from." Douglas sighed, tucking the compass into his pocket. "You're right, of course. You always are. I just—" He paused, searching for the right words. "I just don't want this to become another story of greed and power. The ancients gave us a second chance. We can't waste it." Elena placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We'll fight for it, Douglas. Together." The meeting with the UN representatives took place in the facility's largest conference room, under the watchful gaze of armed guards and surveillance cameras. The artifact, encased in protective glass, sat in the center like a silent witness. Douglas, Elena, and Connor presented their findings, carefully omitting certain details about the artifact's full potential. The representatives were a mix of curiosity and skepticism. One man, a stern-looking diplomat from a major world power, leaned forward. "You're asking us to trust that this object is safe, that you've told us everything. But how can we be sure you're not hiding something? Douglas leaned on his cane, fixing the man with a steely gaze. Because I'm 82 years old, sir. I don't have time for games. The artifact is what it is, a chance for humanity to learn from the mistakes of those who came before us. Whether you believe that or not is up to you. The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. After hours of debate, the representatives agreed to establish a global research initiative to study the artifact. It was a compromise, one that left no single nation in control, but also opened the door to bureaucracy and delay. As the meeting adjourned, Douglas felt a mixture of relief and unease. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. That night, unable to sleep, Douglas returned to the lab where the artifact was kept. The room was quiet, the sphere's glow casting gentle patterns on the walls. He pulled up a chair and sat in front of it, his thoughts heavy. "You know," he said aloud, "I've been wondering why it chose me, an old man with no fancy degrees, no grand ambitions, just a retired librarian with a compass and a stubborn streak." He chuckled softly. "Maybe that's the point, huh? Maybe it takes someone with nothing to lose to see what really matters." The sphere pulsed faintly, as if acknowledging his words. Douglas reached out and placed a hand on its surface. A warmth spread through him, not physical, but deeply comforting, like a memory of sunlight on a cold day. The next morning, Douglas called a meeting with Elena and Connor. "I've been thinking," he began, "about what happens next. The world's not ready for everything the artifact can do. Not yet. But that doesn't mean we should sit on our hands." Elena tilted her head. "What are you suggesting?" "We start small," Douglas said. "Use the knowledge we've uncovered to make little changes, enough to help, but not enough to draw too much attention. Renewable energy, medical advancements, things that won't set off alarms." Connor raised an eyebrow. "And when the world catches on? What then?" Douglas smiled faintly. "Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, one step at a time." Over the next few months, the team worked tirelessly, releasing carefully curated breakthroughs to the scientific community. The artifact's presence was kept under strict security, its true nature known only to a select few. The world began to change, not dramatically, but enough to plant seeds of hope. Douglas, however, felt his time growing short. The artifact seemed to sense it too, its glow softening whenever he was near. One evening, as he sat in the lab, he placed the compass beside the sphere and whispered, "Thank you for the adventure and for the chance to make a difference." When Douglas passed away a few weeks later, the team found a letter he'd left behind. It was addressed to Elena, Connor, and the others who had worked alongside him. "Dear friends," it began, "if you're reading this, it means my journey has come to an end. But yours is just beginning. The artifact chose us not because we're perfect, but because we're willing to try. Don't let fear hold you back. Take risks, make mistakes, and above all, do good. That's the only way forward. With love, Douglas." The artifact now resides in a secure location, its secrets still unfolding. Elena and Connor continue their work, guided by the lessons they learned from an old man who believed in the power of second chances. And somewhere, in the quiet moments between discovery and doubt, they swear they can still hear Douglas's voice, urging them on.